These moments can replay in our head and cause us this feeling of regret or embarrassment. And then it begins to become a part of how we view ourselves and our identity as people. We see ourselves as failures and not as people who have failed. Hello beautiful people, welcome back to my channel. I hope that you are all doing well. Today, your good old online sister is going to be sharing some tips and some encouragement on how to deal with rejection and failure when it comes to relationships, business, your goals. Trust me, sis, we have all been there. I think more of us are beginning to realize that no matter how much of a perfectionist we are, no matter how hard we work, sometimes failure is just inevitable with some of the things that we are working on. And I would even go as far as to say sometimes failure is necessary and beneficial, but bouncing back from failure can be really difficult. I have been there. I have failed in so many areas. I've been an entrepreneur for the last nearly 5 years, and it has not been without failure. Many projects and things that I have been working on, I have started and they have quickly failed, and some of them were failing across a longer period of time. But failure is something I have been acquainted with, as well as success. I have seen academic failure and relational failure. A lot of my friendship, well, a lot is an exaggeration. Whoa, okay. Some of my friendships and relationships have quote unquote failed or ended in a way which I wouldn't have ideally picked if I was writing the story. However, some of them have had to end because of problems, unresolved tensions, failures on my own part. And oftentimes I find that as someone who does have perfectionist tendencies and holds themselves to quite a high standard, when I fail, I can be extremely hard on myself. And sometimes it can be hard to recover, not only because I've had a hit to my ego, but also my identity has been shaken a bit. It hits and affects my self-esteem. And I wanted to come and give advice to those of us who are experiencing, have experienced, or may in the future experience failure or rejection. And I want this to be a video that encourages anybody to know there is life beyond the point of failure or the point of rejection. The first thing I think we need to remember is that failure is something that happens. It is not who you are. And for a lot of us, I think failure is one of those things that just echoes in your mind, and it's a memory that can play over and over. The moment that relationship failed, the moment that person, rejected you, or that company rejected you, the moment you realize that this project you've been working on wasn't actually going to work. These moments can replay in our head and cause us this feeling of regret or embarrassment. And then it begins to become a part of how we view ourselves and our identity as people. We see ourselves as failures and not as people who have failed. And as women, a lot of us are more prone to perfectionist tendencies because we are more prone to people pleasing. And there is a lot of social acceptance which we seek through our performance, and in our performance being successful and according to people's expectations and something that impresses people. And so when we fail, it can sometimes feel as though we are failing as women or we are failing as people, and it impacts our self-esteem and confidence because we are constantly navigating through the world, oftentimes trying to prove ourselves and prove our worthiness. And so when we fail, it's not only a hit to our efforts, it becomes a hit to our identity. And I think it's important to remember that whilst you may fail in a moment or something you may have been working on, or a relationship which you may have been, participating in has failed, it doesn't make you a failure. You don't have to wear that as a label. And yes, it may be hard and it may make you reflect on, well, what is it about me that caused this thing to fail? But there are so many different factors that go into failure that it doesn't just end and begin with you and your competence and your ability. Whilst this project or this relationship or whatever failing may have shown that maybe there are some things for you to work on, take this as an opportunity for growth, something to give you insight into an area where you need to grow. You may need to acquire some more knowledge. You may need to do some personal development. You may need to work work on your character. You may need to work on your communication skills. You may need to work on your efficiency, whatever it is, or your approach to the thing that you are working on. But this is an opportunity for growth, because this moment of failure was a sign that something is not working, but it isn't a sign that you yourself are a failure and that the things you touch are destined for doom. And we can harrow so much into our failures, zooming into every detail, acknowledging every place that we have failed. And we fail to actually balance things out by giving God his praise and being able to say, well, this is actually what I did well. This is actually what turned out well for me. You know, I was able to perform well here. I was able to even get started and have this amazing idea. And so really give yourself some comfort and give yourself some grace and the patience that failing may require in that recovery period, because you are not a failure. Don't put that label on yourself, and don't allow other people to put that label on you either. Even if you have, you know, a recurring pattern of failure, see that as an opportunity to learn that maybe you are on the wrong track. And I think a lot of us see recurring amounts of failure and think, well, you know, it's doom and gloom for me. This relationship failed, and then that relationship failed. And then, well, clearly it is a sign that something somewhere is wrong. And it's not just you and your inherent value or your inherent ability to approach relationships or to approach work or to approach academia. It could be because you are on the wrong track. Maybe you're doing this with the wrong type of people. Maybe you are in the wrong career field. Maybe this is not the course or the examination style for you. You need to now employ a degree of self-awareness that says, I am not a failure as a person. And so clearly something here isn't working. There isn't any synergy between my strengths and what it is I'm currently putting my efforts towards. What can I do to actually bridge this gap? Is it acquiring more knowledge? Is it applying myself to something else? What is it that I can do to fill in that gap if it needs to be filled? And what can I do to really optimize what it is I'm working on for my skill set? Or maybe I need to acquire more skills for what it is I'm trying to work on. And so don't see it as you are inevitably going to fail because at this moment in time you failed. Failure is a point in time. Failure is a thing that happens. It is not who you are. And so following on from that, stop and reflect. When failure happens, take time to actually stop, pause, assess the situation and reflect on what actually went wrong, and be as honest with yourself as possible with the mindset that you can actually change the variables you're about to identify. The reason why I say this is, have you ever seen somebody like about to drop something and in an attempt to scramble to like collect that thing, they end up messing up everything else around them, right? They cause this huge commotion where it's just like, you know what, stop. Let this one thing break, assess the situation and move on in a very calm way. Sometimes when we fail, we scramble to fix all the pieces. We scramble to make everything work. We hold on to things we should really let go of for a lot longer than we actually should. And what ends up happening is we cause more damage, more chaos, more loss than we really should have, right? Because we're trying to make this one thing work. Think about toxic relationships that people sometimes struggle to let go of. In the process of holding on to something which actually hurts you, you end up being damaged way more in the long run than if you would have just let that thing go and dealt with the initial heartbreak that came with the loss. This week on the To My Sisters podcast, we were talking about 10 lessons we've learned from love. And if you haven't gone and listened to that episode, I will leave it in the description because it's actually really good. But one thing that I was talking about is the fact that don't be afraid to let go of love that doesn't work, and heartbreak doesn't last forever. And I think so many of us have this fear of failing in love or having a relationship that failed, and we now have to explain to people, hey, we broke up, you know, I was so in love, yes, but this thing didn't work out. Or we are so afraid of starting again, or we're so afraid of people letting us go that we hold on to something that isn't working. And there's this thing called the sunk cost fallacy, where a lot of us believe that because we have invested so much into something, we would rather just keep on investing into it, spending our time on it, going further with it, even though it's not actually working, than to just stop and do something else, or stop and move in a different direction. We believe that the things that we've invested now become a sunk cost. And so we hold on to these dead investments instead of just saying, you know what, sometimes we need to let a loss be a loss, and we need to move on with something that will help us make some kind of gain, or something that would pour into us a lot more, or which is aligned way better with our goals. And we don't want to let these things go, but inevitably it leads to us losing more in the long run. And so do not be scared to just stop and reflect on what's happening. If you need to take a pause from work, if you need to take a pause between, this project and taking the next project to reflect on what went wrong, if you need to take a bit of a gap year to see, okay, that thing I was doing, like for example with me last year, taking a gap year, I had to stop and think, I'm doing entrepreneurship wrong. And if I don't stop, I'm going to continue to do entrepreneurship wrong. And it's going to lead me down the wrong road. And I'm just going to go further down the wrong direction. So I need to stop right now. And yes, it's going to cost me a few months, but inevitably it will actually save me a couple of years in the future. When it comes to relationships, stop and reflect. Okay, we're ending this relationship now, and it's going to hopefully create room for the next relationship. But I need to reflect on what went wrong in this relationship. I really need to reflect on what were the failures? What were the failing points? What didn't I know? What did I know? And be honest with yourself. I think when we fail or we experience rejection, it's so easy to point the finger. But there's that saying that says when you point a finger, there are three fingers pointing back at you. And so it is important to look at yourself and say, whilst I am not a failure, clearly I have failed in some areas. What areas were they? Was it my communication, my competence, my approach, my planning, my execution? What is it that failed? And then working on developing these areas so that as you move forward, you can feel a bit more confident in your ability. And so after you do that, make a practical plan. Practically moving forward, what are you going to do? So many of us want to dwell in that place of failure, in that place of self-pity, in that place of feeling like, hey, I was rejected, hey, I failed. And especially if you have to experience some kind of loss, especially if it's because of a relationship, or maybe you failed something at your job and it's led to you leaving your job, you may be in the grieving process. And you know what? I completely hear it, but that should be a season. It can be as long or as short as you need it to be. Fully grieve the situation, but do not wallow in self-pity for too long, because practically you're going to need to move forward. Time and seasons wait for no man. You need to continue to move. You need to make some practical plans on how you are about to move going forward, because the thing about the glowing and growing process is you need to keep moving forward. Even if it means you've taken 2 steps back, okay, cool. So how are we going to take 2 steps forward again? How are we going to take 3 steps forward? Even if it means slowing down your progress, that's fine. But as long as we're moving, and as long as that overall trajectory is in the right direction, then we're doing a good job. But that requires practical and intentional steps. And so when it comes to your work, what does it look like to get a new job? What does it look like to start that new project? What does it look like to have a better business plan than the one you had before, or to launch that campaign a lot better? When it comes to relationships, what sort of partner are you looking for? Are you going to, put yourself in therapy? Are you going to start having hard conversations with people? What boundaries do you need to put in place? What books do you need to read maybe? When it comes to your academia, what's your next, revision plan saying, and how realistic is it? And don't be afraid to pivot. Do not be afraid to say, I'm going to try something completely new. You do not need to be confined to your old mindsets. You do not have to be confined to the way you think things should be done, or the way you used to think things should be done. A lot of us are attached to these timelines and these processes and sequences which we think are traditional and successful. But oftentimes when you try it out for yourself, you'll find out that this doesn't actually work for me. That way of studying, that way of approaching work, that way of doing relationships, and that timeline doesn't actually work for me. And so practically, what will work for me? And that requires self-awareness, but it takes a commitment to actually walking out the steps in that practical plan. So take time to really sit back down and re-strategize. Re-strategizing, rebranding is one of my favorite things, because a lot of times we realize that the thing we started off with isn't actually working as well as it should. And when we take time to re-strategize, we give ourselves an opportunity to actually succeed. But that requires us to not be so attached to our old strategies, to our old targets, to our old approaches. And a lot more of us are attached to our traditions and attached to other people's perception of the way that we should do things than we are actual success. And you need to make a plan for yourself that will actually work and become more attached to reaching your goal than you are the way you're going to get there. There are so many different ways to reach the same destination, and you may have failed because you are on the wrong path and you need to find a different one. But if you are so attached to the old path which you were taking, which kept getting you lost, which kept getting you confused, which kept taking you to the wrong place, and you don't want to reorient and re-navigate yourself, you're more attached to the scenery than you are to the destination. But after you have re-strategized and you've come up with a new practical plan, ask for help. A lot of us fail because we're trying to do things alone. A lot of us fail because we may not have wise counsel around us. A lot of us fail because we are trying to navigate things purely dependent on our own knowledge, which sometimes, especially when you're trying to do something big, something new, something out of your comfort zone, is limited. And honestly, it has sometimes been hard for me to admit, or it's required a lot of humility for me to admit at times, I actually don't know enough. I don't know enough about where I'm trying to go and how to get there. I need to get somebody who knows more than me. And so back to the whole perfectionism thing. Don't feel like you have to put up this disguise and paint this illusion that you have it all figured out, so much so that you become deceived by your own false image and by the mask that you are creating. You need help around you. And the more you deny yourself the ability to have support and the ability to get other people's input and guidance into your development, the longer it's probably going to take you to succeed. No man is an island, and wise counsel really does bless you when you are trying to do something which, like I said, you have never done before. And so if you can, find mentors, find friends, let people know what it is you are trying to do and ask them for their help. You're probably not the only person who has failed in this area. If you're failing in your marriage or in your relationship, you're probably not the only person who has faced this kind of problem, who has faced this kind of tension. Go and draw on the wisdom of other people who have fought through the challenges you are going through, or people who have overcome the failures that you are currently encountering. Or when it comes to your career, maybe you failed on a particular launch or a particular thing or project you were working on. Well, go and speak to people who have had successful launches and successful campaigns and who have able to build 6, 7, 8-figure companies, and ask them, hey, this is something that I did wrong. Did you experience this? I noticed that this is something that you are doing right. What is it that I am doing wrong? Allow people to come in on your journey and give their expertise. One of the most challenging things about our generation, I think, is because, and it's one of the most beautiful things, we are the DIY generation, like the do it yourself. I can go on the internet, I can become self-taught, I can become an expert in my field from the comfort of my own home. But sometimes you shouldn't do things like that alone. Sometimes you are better off having the accountability and the help of other people who are also experts or who may have a bit more longevity in this thing than you have. Whilst you may have zeal and enthusiasm, or even if the wind has been knocked out of you because you failed once, there are other people who have more longevity and more experience at falling down and getting back up, probably more than you do. And so go and lean on them. Go and lean on their strength and their knowledge and their understanding, and go and ask them for guidance. And this doesn't just have to be, up, down in terms of you getting people who are older than you. It could also be side to side and peer to peer. And the people who are, around you, who are grinding and hustling as much as you are, or who are trying out the whole relationship dating scene as much as you are, giving you their insight and their wisdom as well, and you bouncing off of ideas with them. Because one of the things that can often lead us to the wrong place is the fact that we are going there alone. And so do not be afraid to ask for help as you re-strategize, but also don't be afraid to ask for support and comfort once you are dealing with the sadness that can come with failure. You know, have your friends come over, eat that tub of ice cream, watch that film with them, have that FaceTime call that says, I'm just having a really, really bad day. I just got fired, or I'm having a really bad day. I need someone to vent to. I want to cry with someone, or I need somebody who can, you know, encourage me. And I think one of the things that's comforted me most in times of failure is the belief other people have in me, but especially because it brings out those feelings of insecurity. Oftentimes I'm saying things to myself, or my internal monologue or my internal thoughts are telling me lies, but I believe them in the time. I believe that maybe my life isn't going to go anywhere, or, you know, I failed once, I'm probably always going to fail at stuff. And it sometimes takes friends and the trusted voices of the friends and sisters in my life to be like, hey, shut the devil up. He is talking way too much and you are listening way too attentively. That man is nothing but a liar. And then you realize, yes, and then you suddenly come into your right mind. But sometimes it's easier to go down those rabbit holes when you are listening to yourself and to yourself only. You need to diversify the voices around you. And the last thing is set realistic and measurable goals to make sure you are moving in the right direction. After you've re-strategized and you set your plan, be sure to just evaluate from time to time, okay, are we moving in the right direction? Does this feel a bit better than it did, you know, the last time? And have that accountability around you as well, who you can check in with to be like, hey, this is going well, you know, last time I burnt out, this time I'm not trying to burn out. Have you noticed that, you know, things are doing a bit better for me? And just allowing yourself to have those regular check-ins and evaluations to be like, you know what, how are these things actually going? I love to journal every single day if I can. And it just allows me to be like, where's your head at, Courtney? Like, how are you feeling? Because one thing I think I've failed at greatly in the past, and if you've listened to like my entrepreneurial journey, then you would know this. But if you want more like insight into it, then I'm happy to give it. But I burnt out and like had a very toxic relationship with work as I was building my first company. And one of the things I have, you know, really had to implement into my strategic approach to building my career has been rest and recovery, especially because I have PCOS and because my mental health, like I get huge bouts of anxiety and panic attacks and all kind of flare-ups from time to time. And so for me, it's been about checking in with myself to be like, hey, you know, are we seeing the same toxic tendencies crop back up? And just be honest with yourself and allow other people to be honest with you that, hey, no, you're doing a really good job. You don't need to do too much more. Or maybe you can actually push yourself and, you know, you're being a bit too comfortable. It's been nice to have those moments of reevaluation that have allowed me to say, actually, I can do a bit more. Especially because sometimes I think when you fail, it makes you scared to try again and to go in, like to really dedicate yourself and really go back with that same level of enthusiasm. Because, you know, if you get burnt once, you're always going to be a bit shaky around fire. And so for me, it's been about allowing myself to, you know, feel the heat a little bit, but know when I'm getting too close and I'm about to get burnt. And I think that discernment and that wisdom and that sensitivity as well has helped me navigate building my confidence, especially after a moment or a season of failing. And so, my loves, I hope that this video was helpful. I hope that you enjoyed it and that this conversation was something which could, you know, help you, especially in the more trickier seasons of life. I am always here to share wisdom and advice. So let me know if you have any questions or any thoughts down below in the comments. I really love and adore all of you, and I will talk to you very, very soon. As always, stay beautiful and stay blessed. Mwah.